Hello, good listeners. You're tuned in to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, where we share stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. I'm delighted to share with you the second and final part of my conversation with Dr. Aileen Friesen. Aileen is Associate Professor of History at the University of Winnipeg, the co-chair of the Center for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Executive Director of the Plett Foundation, and editor of the Plett Foundation's magazine, Preservings. I spoke with Aileen back in October of 2025. In part 1, we left off talking about her use of film in teaching Mennonite history. Today, we pick up our conversation talking with Aileen's forays into Russia and Ukrainian archives and the threat the historical records are facing since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Here now is part 2 of our conversation, which has been edited for length. When you lived in St. Petersburg, was it? Studied there? What time period was that? In Putin's reign already, or?
That was during Putin's reign. That was in 2002 was the first year. I'm going to say 2002 or 2003. I can't remember now which one.
Past Glasnost, past all of that. You're a fluent speaker of Russian. What doors does this open for you in your work?
So it's being able to go there, to communicate with people, to find documents in the archives. That is part of being a historian, right? I was just going through a translation for an article that we have in Preservings, and there's nuances. And so being able to understand that nuance is part of knowing the language.
How would you describe the reception of Mennonites and the interest in their history by present-day Ukrainians?
Ukrainians have been very welcoming. We've established strong relations with various scholars, with institutions, with archives, particularly in the Zaporizhia area. Interestingly enough, the last time I was in Ukraine, which was in 2019, I was waiting for the archives to open, and I went to a bakery, and I was just having something to eat, and a man came and sat down near me and wanted to engage in conversation, and told him why I was there, that I was looking for materials on Mennonites, and he knew who Mennonites were. He knew that they were pacifists, and then he started to tell me about his war experience, because he had been out east fighting against the Russian Federation. This is before the current day war. And so he started talking about that. So I was shocked to find that this sort of ordinary person off the street knew who Mennonites were, and then wanted to engage me in a conversation about violence and when violence is justified and all these types of things. You just really don't expect that. So there is knowledge among some people. Obviously, some people probably know less, but the people who don't know, they still pass the buildings that were built by Mennonites. I mean, they're all over the place. Of course, we've lost some of those buildings now with the war, but at least at that point in time, the remnants of Mennonites were everywhere.
When the Soviet Union collapsed in the 1990s, Mennonite historians gained significant access to archives in Ukraine. With the current war between Russia and Ukraine, it threatens the very existence of this historical collection of Mennonite documents. You have developed numerous relationships with historians and archivists and institutions in Ukraine. What can you tell us about the status of Mennonite-related archives and preserved history in present-day Ukraine?
The status is in peril. In certain places, archives haven't been destroyed. So Zaporizhia Archives is still running. The archives in Dnipro is still running. Things were taken from Kherson when the Russians occupied Kherson. So I don't entirely know what was taken and not taken. There would have been documents in Mariupol, for instance, gone. Kharkiv the archives is still existing, or they're still at least posting on Facebook, but anything could happen. It's a war. So there's no guarantees about the safety and security of any archival files. And I would just sort of draw people's attention to the parallel with World War II, in which there were countless documents that were taken, lost, or destroyed. Sometimes even I asked Dr. Natalia Wenger, who is a research associate at the University of Winnipeg and is from Dnipro, I'll know a document should exist. I'll be like, okay, what about this type of document? She's like, gone. World War II, destroyed. It's not coming back.
Wow.
No matter how much you want it to come back, it is not coming back. And so we're faced with a similar situation right now in that thus far Zaporizhzhia hasn't been hit. I will say that the archival projects that were done in the past by people like Harvey Dick, by people like Paul Taves, have become so much more important now. I think at the time it was about access, but now it's that we actually have a copy of things on microfilm. And so there was a lot of time and effort and funds that were dedicated to those specific projects. So thank you to everyone who made those projects possible, because without them, we would be in an even worse state. I would also add that in Crimea, there are tons of documents related to Mennonites that John Staples did a little bit of work there and used them in his book. But there's still lots of documents waiting to be discovered, which we have now are cut off from access to. And then, so what are we doing now? Thanks once again to the Schroeder Foundation, we've been able to have a digitization project happening in Zaporizhzhia. And we have 2 researchers who have been scanning and photographing documents for us. And so we have been collecting those documents, and Dr. Natalia Wenger at the University of Winnipeg now has been creating finding aids for those documents so that we know that we have them. And I've also been in contact with other scholars who have worked in the region, just saying to them, whatever photographs you have, like, let's bring them together so that we know exactly what we have copies of, because at any moment these things could disappear, or we just have no control over the situation.
And how are the copies, where are they being collected and kept safe from harm?
So these are digital documents.
Okay.
So they are then transferred to us, and then we've been transferring them to Mennonite Heritage Archive so that they aren't sort of available at the moment, because right now the focus is just on collecting and making sure we get as many documents as we can. So this has been ongoing started in June 2024 is when I was able to get the funding put together.
Sounds like an immense task.
Immense, and it's so important. I mean, everything that has been lost, the lives lost, the buildings lost, the documents that have been lost, it's all just devastating, but we do what we can.
In Russia, which also holds Mennonite records, access has been cut off. I spoke with Maria Lotsmanova here a few weeks ago on the show, and she was telling me about how the Gulag Museum of History, where she used to work, has now been shuttered, along with many other archives in Russia, which is a different way of losing records as well. And who knows what will happen to those? Will they be destroyed? Or
those ones are obviously, being cut off from access. But it's been difficult. The scholarly relations that existed, that had been built since, we had the Soviet period in which there was mistrust and distrust, and governments trying to make sure that people aren't communicating too much, into an era where we could exchange scholarly ideas and be there. I mean, I worked in St. Petersburg archives. I worked in Moscow archives. It was an enriching experience for me. I appreciate very much access given to me of these documents and what I was able to see and read and understand on the basis of them. But now that has been cut off. And those relationships are a bit fraught at the moment. I mean, even if on an individual level you can still have them, something has shifted and changed. And so that's been very sad and is going to affect what we can do. So Paul Taves got us a bunch of documents from St. Petersburg. Natalia was working with those documents, writing some articles and preservings based off of those documents. But it's not like she could now go to St. Petersburg and access them.
Right. And if you don't know all of what's there, you have no idea of what might be lost.
You have no idea what might be lost, and you have no idea about what questions to ask. And this is what happens, is that we go there on these sort of reconnaissance missions to figure out what do they have And then on the basis of what do they have, then what are the questions I can ask historically speaking? And that process has now been turned on its head because I can't do that. Or there's certain questions I ask in my head that now I'm like, I can't access the documents to answer those questions. So I have to move on to a different question. Now that's like, during a war in which destruction is happening, that's the least of our concerns, but it still does affect the ways in which we engage with history.
In Canada, there are 5 regional Mennonite archives and 1 national Mennonite archive. What would you say is the most important role the community plays in supporting a community archive?
Well, I think that, first of all, archives rely on volunteers, whether that be scanning photographs or newspapers, or sometimes, and we've had this wonderful history at Mennonite Heritage Archives of people translating letters and documents. Sometimes they've written that old Gothic script that is very difficult for many of us to read. That has been, wonderful to be able to preserve that, to be able to make those documents accessible. Obviously, financial contributions are also important. None of these institutions run without money. Also, giving to your local Mennonite Historical Society is important. So those are different ways. Probably one of my favorite ways is just document donations. So people have, like I said, all sorts of things. And sometimes they end up throwing them out, and they're just like, I threw out all these photographs. And I said, why did you do that? Why didn't you just give them to the archives? Maybe they aren't of interest, but maybe they are. Let Conrad Stace be the judge of whether or not they have historical significance, because he's trained to do so. And so that's an important process of just people actually donating materials to the archives.
Where are you headed in your ongoing research studies, and what new lines of discovery and learning are you pursuing at the moment?
I have way too many projects on the go. I'm working on a book, Violence Among Neighbors, which is focused on that revolutionary period in Ukraine and how Mennonites coped with living under the specter of violence. I have another book project that is looking at the actual migration out and taking almost a gendered and generational approach to it. And then I'm also working with one of my colleagues, Dr. Maria Malentieva, on a podcast about Mennonite experience within the Soviet state, particularly focused on the 1930s, and looking at how various individual stories from that devastating period under Stalin.
Thank you so much, Aileen, for taking the time away from your very busy schedule to talk with me today, and for your immense contributions to the field.
Well, thanks a lot, Dan.
That wraps up my 2-part conversation with Dr. Aileen Friesen, Associate Professor of History at the University of Winnipeg. The Mennonite Heritage Archives holds records pertaining to the history of Mennonite settlement in Manitoba, as well as books and articles by Dr. Aileen Friesen. To learn more or to listen to this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. We'd love to know what you're taking away from this program. Let us know by dashing off an email to info@mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
In an upcoming episode, I'll be chatting with Elmer Hildebrand, President and CEO of Golden West Radio. Elmer has been with the network for almost 70 years. Thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace and David Klippenstein. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back next week with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.